Get on the ground, or you're under arrest. A shout cuts through the summer heat. An arm yanked back. An elderly man slammed against a scorching hood. The snap of handcuffs, click. No warning. No reason. Just skin color. The young officer growled, "I don't care who you are." But seconds later, the entire parking lot went silent. The man he just humiliated was General Drayden Voss, wartime commander, national hero, recipient of the U.S. Presidential Medal of Honor. Think this couldn't happen where you live? Then ask yourself, does justice in your state see color? Today's story might just shake you to your core. On a blazing July afternoon, the sun scorched every brick along the main boulevard of Ashborough Hollow, Alabama. The temperature had climbed to 98 degrees Fahrenheit, and not a single breeze stirred the thick air trapped between the town's aging red brick buildings. The big leaf tree outside the church barely rustled when a truck passed by, and the brown sparrows had all taken shelter beneath the awning of Leroy's Fade House barbershop. Here, life moved slowly. Folks still called each other by their middle names, or at the very least, knew each other from church, the general store, or the annual spring barbecue. The police siren might sound 3 times a month, if that. And at the Red Line pump gas station next to the firehouse, you could still buy handmade apple pie, baked fresh every Wednesday by Mrs. Delphine Rook. At the heart of town, where Maple Street crossed Oak Ridge Lane, stood the oldest store in the county, Hammond's General Supply. Its tin roof was faded, its wooden sign scratched and barely legible. But inside, always buzzing. Hammond's wasn't just where you picked up cornmeal, soap, or fresh milk. It was where you learned who just got married, who was selling their old truck, or who hit bingo at the church last weekend. That afternoon, in an air thick with pine wood and the sweat from cotton shirts, Mr. Mac Greeley, the owner, stood behind the counter wiping a glass, half listening as Wyatt Carter told the same story about his granddad catching a catfish as big as a sofa. In the corner, young Micah Holloway stopped in to grab a bag of ice for his broken AC unit and sneak in a few texts to a girl from school. No one was watching the time. In Ashborough Hollow, the only things that made people hurry were storms and Sunday service. But today, something unusual happened. Right in front of the store, a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking spot by the door. A 2021 Chevrolet Suburban. Military plates. The door opened, and out stepped a tall black man, broad-shouldered, precise in posture. He moved slowly but deliberately. He wore a black short-sleeved shirt, clean khaki pants, and walked straight into the store without saying a word. A moment of stillness passed through Hammond's. Drayden Voss had returned, and though no one said it out loud, the feeling was unmistakable. Something in his eyes, the kind of quiet only people who've seen war carry with them, made the room feel cooler somehow, even though the air conditioner was still sputtering like always. The man who had just walked into Hammond's General Supply was retired General Drayden Voss, 66 years old, a name not only remembered in Ashborough Hollow, but deeply respected. Not because of the medals he brought back from the Middle East, not because of the old photo hanging in the mayor's office from back when he was still a colonel, but because of how he came back after 35 years of service. No parade, no shiny accolades, just a weary heart, searching for something the battlefield never taught him: peace. He lived in a small wooden house at the end of Elmsfield Lane, about 6 blocks from town. Each morning, he brewed coffee in an old aluminum pot and watered his plants with a dented metal pail. No one ever heard him raise his voice. No one ever heard him complain. On rainy days, he'd hold an umbrella for Mrs. Delphine Rook, walking her from the parking lot to the store. On hot days, he'd wait so others could go ahead. The way he walked, slow, steady, unhurried, made young people pause and old folks nod in quiet approval. "Afternoon, Mr. Voss." Mac Greeley looked up from the counter, his voice calm and even. "Afternoon, Mac. These peaches any good today?" Voss smiled gently, his eyes soft, like he'd left all the noise of the world far, far behind. The mood settled again, familiar and easy. Wyatt Carter kept spinning his catfish tail. Micah dropped a second bag of ice into his basket, and Mrs. Rook quietly wiped down the pie display case. But what Drayden Voss didn't know was that out in the parking lot, someone was watching his SUV. A pair of unfamiliar eyes. Not the gaze of someone who knew him, but someone who didn't want to. And like most trouble in this world, it all started with a look. Across from Hammond's parking lot, a Ford Explorer patrol unit sat still beneath the shade of a magnolia tree, engine idling in a low, steady hum. Inside the cruiser sat Officer Thomas Kellan, 29 years old, recently transferred to Ashborough Hollow from the city of Knoxville, Tennessee. His eyes were sharp, razor sharp. Around town, people had all kinds of names for Kellan. The new officer, that city cop, and more bluntly, the boy who doesn't know the South yet. He was young, white, blonde buzz cut, wore Ray-Bans, and always carried a little black notebook, like he was auditioning for the FBI. In the 6 months since he'd arrived, Kellan hadn't exactly won the town over. He ticketed cars parked facing the wrong direction, stopped fishermen at Westwood Lake to check IDs just because he had a feeling, and regularly questioned young black men after evening pickup games at the Ashborough Hollow court. And now, his eyes locked onto the black Chevrolet Suburban parked near the storefront. Didn't blink, didn't turn away. Tall black man, black shirt, clean khakis, new SUV, military plates. Too many red flags for someone like Kellan, who believed his gut was never wrong. He squinted, lowered the window, and tapped a rhythm on the steering wheel. "Weird," he muttered, then raised the radio. "Dispatch, this is 317. Got a suspicious individual outside Hammond's, possibly tied to questionable activity. I'm approaching. No further justification needed. No violation necessary." For Kellan, suspicious sometimes just meant a man too confident to shrink, too calm to belong. And just like that, like the first spark landing in dry southern hay, he opened the door, fastened his holster strap, and headed toward the shop entrance. Inside, retired General Drayden Voss had just placed a bag of golden peaches into his basket when the chime of the front door rang behind him. The breeze slipped in, bringing the smell of sun-baked pavement and the faint tang of leather from the cop's belt. The air, steady and slow just a moment ago, paused for half a beat. Officer Thomas Kellan stood at the threshold, right hand resting lightly on his holstered pistol, sunglasses still on. He scanned the room once, then walked straight toward the man crouched over a shelf of local honey. "Hey, you, let me see your ID." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the soft hum of the overhead AC. Drayden looked up, brows slightly furrowed. "Excuse me? Are you talking to me?" Black shirt, khakis, drove that SUV outside. "I'm requesting identification." Right now, a few heads in the store had started to turn. Mrs. Delphine Rook, mid-wrap on a bag of peppermint candy, froze. Mac greedily squinted from behind the counter. Drayden answered calmly, not the least bit shaken. "I'm just here for peaches. Is there a problem, officer?" "Problem is, you don't look like you live around here. Military plates. No name tag on your shirt. What's your business here?" Drayden gripped the handle of his basket, then gently set it down. "I retired after 35 years of service. I live here. I'm buying groceries. And you?" The corner of Kellan's mouth twitched. That question, turning the table, irritated him. "I'm not here to debate. Show me ID, or I'll detain you for failure to identify." Drayden paused, silent, then exhaled slowly. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, its edges frayed from time. He flipped it open, revealing a faded military ID with a clear name and photo. Brigadier General Drayden Voss, United States Army, Ret. And right then, a small moment unfolded, one the town would recall again and again. As Drayden handed over the wallet, a small photo slipped from inside and fluttered to the floor. It showed him holding a young white boy with blonde hair, dressed in a miniature army uniform. The child grinned wide, holding up a cap embroidered with the words, "Army Strong." Behind them, the American flag waved in full glory. Kellan glanced down and caught sight of the photo. He froze for a fraction of a second, not because of the ID, but because the boy in that photo looked exactly like him. Same eyes, same smile, a face from a past he'd buried, now suddenly staring up at him at the worst possible time. A flicker of something passed through Kellan's gaze. Doubt, memory. Then he dismissed it, didn't ask. didn't speak, just tightened his grip on the holster at his hip, as if clinging to the last sliver of power in the room. He didn't want the past pulling him out of this moment. Didn't want confusion mistaken for weakness. Didn't want to be undone by a photo from the wallet of the very man he was trying to command. And so, Kellan's face shifted, not with emotion, but with fury. Fury at himself, and fury at the calm gaze that now silently dismantled his fragile ego. I don't care who you are. You're going to follow orders. Put your hands on your head. I'm conducting a search. The words hit the air like a slap in Hammond's quiet little shop. But Drayden Voss didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply stood tall, shoulders square like a bronze statue, and looked Kellan dead in the eye. The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. You know, he said, voice low and steady, I faced the Taliban, roadside bombs, nights with no light and no backup. But the way you're looking at me right now, that's the most dangerous thing I've seen. In that moment, even as soft country music played overhead, all sense of normalcy disappeared, swallowed by the quiet tension rising like a wave down aisle 2. Retired General Drayden Voss stood firm, unmoving, unblinking, a stone monument in a gathering storm. But Kellan had already crossed the line, rattled by the photo, exposed by that unshaken gaze. He clenched his jaw, pulled out his handcuffs like it was instinct. No justification now, no logic, just the need to win, to crush whatever it was that had just scraped at his fragile sense of control. Hands behind your back. Now. His voice wasn't loud, but it dripped with menace. Drayden didn't move. You're letting emotion override your judgment, officer. His voice, calm, steady, cut through the chaos like a blade of reason. That sentence was the spark. Kellan lunged forward, grabbed Drayden's left arm, twisted it back hard, and shoved it down against his spine. Drayden winced, but didn't resist. A loud gasp, "Oh my lord," burst from behind the counter. Mrs. Delphine Rook dropped her bag of peppermints to the floor. The glass door flew open. Blazing summer light poured in. Kellan dragged Drayden out into the parking lot like a criminal, cold steel cuffs snapping tight around the general's wrists. His wallet hit the pavement. The photo of the blonde child fell face down in the sunlight. A single bead of sweat rolled down the back of Drayden's neck. Not from fear, from sorrow. Whispers rose across the lot. Wait, is that Mr. Voss? Dear God, that's General Voss. He brought an entire unit back from Afghanistan. People began to gather. Some pulled out their phones. Others just stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. Bobby Klein, 72, a retired Marine, leaned on his cane and stepped forward. What the hell did you just do to my hero, kid? But Kellan didn't hear him. His face was flushed, his forehead wet with sweat. He shoved Drayden against the hot hood of the black Suburban, forcing him to lean into the heat like punishment. You're under arrest for failure to comply. Refuse to show ID, Kellan snapped. I did. You just refused to see it, Drayden replied, his voice still calm. But this time his eyes had changed. The patience was gone. What remained was cold, heavy disappointment. Beep. Someone's phone had started recording. The silence in the parking lot thickened. And then, I'm live streaming this. A young female voice, clear and firm. Tasha Linwood, junior journalism major, held her phone shoulder high. The red live icon glowed on screen. Nearly 400 viewers, and counting. This was no longer just a confrontation between two men. It was now a standoff between a wronged man and the collective judgment of an entire town. The noonday sun scorched the pavement outside Hammond's grocery. Everything slowed, except the blinking red light of a live stream and the breathless hush of the crowd. Drayden Voss, 62, stood motionless at the front of the vehicle, hands cuffed behind his back, black shirt soaked in sweat, but his back remained straight, his polished black shoes still sharp, just like when he wore the uniform. His chin was raised, his eyes not pleading, not angry, just silent. The kind of silence that makes others see themselves. Wait, is that Drayden Voss? A raspy voice called out from the far edge of the lot. Bobby Klein stepped closer, gripping his wooden cane. He studied the man under the sun, then called out, I know him. I stood beside him in Kandahar in '09. That's General Voss. The name dropped like a thunderclap. A ripple swept through the crowd. No way, he got a medal from the president himself. He led the flood rescue mission last year, didn't he? Good Lord, why would they handcuff him? Tasha Linwood was still live streaming, her voice trembling with outrage. We're witnessing a decorated U.S. Army general being humiliated in public. Almost 900 people are watching this live, and the number's still rising. Only now did Officer Kellan begin to realize things were spiraling out of control. He turned, glanced at the crowd, saw the raised phones recording the stunned, silent faces. He stammered, "I didn't know who he was. I was just following protocol." But no one was listening anymore. An elderly woman stepped forward. Joni Temple, 84, white hair tucked neatly under a sun hat. Her voice cracked with fury. "I lost my husband in the war. But General Voss has come to visit our family every Thanksgiving since. You're dishonoring a living symbol." The quiet tension exploded, not with shouting, but with sheer presence. The crowd didn't scream. They didn't riot. They simply stood there, a living wall, encircling the two men, leaving Officer Kellan no way out. Drayden Voss turned his head, met the young officer's eyes. "I don't need you to know who I am. But now, you've shown everyone exactly who you are." The unrest in the Hammond's grocery parking lot hadn't calmed. People stood firm. Phones stayed raised. The live stream continued to beam across hundreds of screens throughout Alabama. No one walked away. No one looked down. And then a siren. A scuffed black police SUV screeched to a stop at the edge of the crowd. The door flung open. Out stepped a man in a wrinkled uniform, sleeves creased from a lunch interrupted, lines of wear on his face, but his eyes sharp. Sergeant Daryl Mathers, 53 years old, lifelong resident of Ashborough Hollow, direct supervisor to Officer Kellan. He muttered as he walked forward, "Lord Almighty, who calls in a siren blast at noon on a Tuesday?" But when his eyes landed on the scene, General Drayden Voss, wrists cuffed, sweat running down his face, surrounded by an outraged town, his breath caught, his face went pale, like he'd just taken a punch to the gut. "Drayden," Mathers could barely speak. "Hello, Daryl," Voss said quietly. "Been a while." Mathers didn't hesitate. He spun on Kellan Brown, the young officer frozen in place like a marble statue, and roared, "Take off the cuffs. Now." Kellan fumbled, hands trembling as he pulled out the keys. The crowd fell utterly silent. But just as the keys slid into the lock, a voice rang out, female, commanding, not from the crowd, not from the press. It was Amara Holt, Voss's adopted daughter, age 26, military intelligence officer, just back from Charleston to visit her father. Still dressed in a flight suit, boots dusty, eyes sharp. She had arrived moments earlier, after seeing the live stream. "What did he do to my father?" she shouted, voice low but thunderous. "He didn't just handcuff a general. He insulted an entire generation." She walked straight up and held out her military ID towards Sergeant Mathers. "I'm requesting an internal report immediately. This is a direct violation of Code June 18th, 41. Unlawful conduct toward a retired military officer." The air turned heavy. Sergeant Mathers gave a slow nod. "Amara, I know, and I'll take full responsibility." He removed the handcuffs from General Voss with his own hands, then turned to Kellan, voice dropping low. "You may not have known who he was, but now you know how the people see him, and soon you'll know how they see you." Kellan was breathing fast, his face pale, speechless. It was already too late. As the cuffs came off, Drayden Voss gently rubbed his wrist, not from pain, but as if wiping away the stain of something that never should have happened under a clear midday sky. The entire parking lot held its breath. Every camera, every gaze, every phone lens was on him. But Voss didn't speak right away. He looked up, met Kellan Brown's eyes, not with anger, not even judgment, but with something sharper than any rebuke. Disappointment. "You know," Voss began, voice low, steady. "In 35 years of service, I faced men with weapons and men with hate. But never have I been treated like an enemy in my own country just because of my skin." Kellan looked down, lips pressed tight. Voss stepped forward. his tone still calm but firm. You saw a clean car, a plain shirt, and you decided I didn't belong. You didn't ask my name. You didn't look in my eyes. You looked at my skin and made a judgment. A gust of summer wind swept across the awnings of Hammond's grocery, rattling the automatic door. An everyday sound now echoing like a cold gavel in a courtroom. I'm not asking for an apology, Voss continued. I don't need your pity. I need you to understand. Your duty as a police officer is to protect, not to humiliate, to listen, not to bark orders, to know the difference between right and wrong, not between us and them. The crowd stirred. An older woman clapped once, then another. Then applause broke out like a sudden summer rain, growing louder, heavier, undeniable. Amara stood beside her father. Her hand gently gripped his arm, eyes glistening. Sergeant Mathers gave a firm nod. I'll file a report with Internal Affairs. They'll be under review starting today. Voss gave a tired but sincere smile. I don't want him destroyed. I want him to learn what's right. And I want this town to know silence is no longer an option. That sentence, simple as a father's advice, yet loud as a bell in the middle of a town square, left everyone frozen, from the veterans to the kids still live streaming on their phones. Everyone understood they had just witnessed something bigger than a confrontation. They had witnessed a lesson in character. Within 2 hours of the incident at Hammond's grocery parking lot, the 1-minute, 12-second video Tasha Linwood recorded had gone viral on social media. The hashtags read, hashtag wrong man cuffed, hashtag General Drayden Voss, hashtag justice has no color, hashtag dignity doesn't flinch, hashtag he was a father not a suspect. It spread like a summer wildfire. Across veteran groups, social justice networks, even national outlets like Good Morning America and the Daily Report. Everyone wanted to know, how could a man like General Drayden Voss, 67 years old, former 3-star commander, be treated like a suspect just for buying a few peaches? That same afternoon, NBR News arrived at the Ashborough Hollow Police Precinct. Reporter Lainey Brooks stood in front of Hammond's grocery, mic in hand, framed by a wall of flowers and a sign locals had hung themselves. We stand with General Voss. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He just spoke the truth. Lainey reported on the 6 p.m. broadcast. And somehow, that was enough to make a whole nation listen. By the next morning, the Ashborough Hollow Police Precinct launched an internal investigation. Police Chief Jonah Beckett, who once served with Voss in Bosnia in 1998, couldn't stay silent after Sergeant Daryl Mathers submitted his report. In an emergency press conference, Beckett announced, Officer Brown has been placed on immediate suspension and will face a full inquiry into his conduct and racial profiling history. This town owes General Voss an apology. Across the country, from Michigan to Arkansas, retired service members began to write to speak out, not just about Drayden Voss, but about themselves. Stories of being treated unfairly, of being judged for how they looked, of being doubted for simply looking different. A movement began without banners, only memory and truth. 1 week later, Officer Kellan Brown was officially terminated. In a closed hearing, he sat in silence as the footage of his own words played back. Every harsh command, every look of contempt, now stained into the record. When he exited the station for the last time, he didn't speak to the press, but someone near the barricades heard him murmur one line. I thought I was doing the right thing. Turns out, I never really knew what right was. The story didn't end there. It spread from small-town council meetings to state legislative sessions. General Voss, who never sought to be a symbol, was now a name echoed in debates on police reform. Through quiet dignity, through grace, and through one simple line, you can't handcuff the truth. Drayden Voss made an entire nation stop and think. 2 months after the incident at Hammond's General Supply, the image of General Drayden Voss, standing calm in the eye of injustice, appeared on the cover of Time magazine, under the headline, Dignity Doesn't Flinch. He never called himself a hero. In multiple interviews, he simply shrugged and said, I just did what anyone should do. But the nation didn't see him as just anyone. Schools invited him to speak. Veterans from across the country sent him letters of thanks. Human rights organizations quoted his name as they called for law enforcement reform. General Voss never asked for a spotlight. He returned to his familiar work at the local Veteran Support Center, where he'd long helped young soldiers cope with trauma and aging vets battle loneliness. But since that day, the small office at the end of Elmsfield Lane stayed lit longer. Not just veterans came now. Young officers looking to unlearn their bias. Black students facing discrimination at school. Every day, people wanting to understand justice. Not from a textbook, but from a man who was handcuffed for doing nothing wrong. Then, one crisp autumn morning at the Governor's Hall in Alabama, he was honored with the Medal for Courageous Citizenship. Not for his rank, but for how he stood still in the storm and kept his heart steady. In his short but powerful speech, he said only this: "I don't stand here because I'm stronger than anyone. I stand here because I've learned, in war and in peace. No one can take your dignity unless you let them." And then, without waiting for applause, he stepped down. General Drayden Voss didn't need to become a legend. He only wanted people to remember this. The way we respond to injustice is what will outlive the cheers. We can teach each other how to shoot, how to wear a badge. But can we teach each other how to see one another without prejudice? I'm not asking for agreement. I just hope that what happened makes a few of us start asking, what exactly are we protecting? And in a small town called Ashborough Hollow, where people once only knew faces, now everyone knows his name, not because of scandal, but because his dignity forced a nation to look inward. Maybe what made his story resonate wasn't just that he was disrespected. It was how he responded. He didn't shout. He didn't retaliate. He stood there calm, steady, a reminder that dignity doesn't have to raise its voice to be heard. In a world where bias still lurks, where honor can get lost behind a name tag or a uniform, it's people like him, people who don't fight with fists, but with truth, who truly change the world. This story isn't just about one man or one mistake. It's about how we choose to face injustice, whether we're the witness or the one wronged. Because silence is never neutral. It's the nod that lets injustice grow. If we don't speak up, you just heard a true story. And if it made you pause to reflect on fairness, on dignity, or just on how we treat one another, please share this video with a friend. And if you want to keep walking with us through real, powerful, and inspiring stories like this one, hit that subscribe button on Mr. 7 Stories. This is where we tell life as it is. Not flashy, but true. Have you ever witnessed an injustice like this? Share your story in the comments, because your voice might be the light someone needs to find their way through the dark.